webinar topic of narcissistic abuse, how to spot it, survive it, and thrive. We welcome Janet Sturtz. Janet is a licensed clinical social worker and supervisor in Texas and in Florida. She's also certified in EMDR, in trauma, and in integrative behavioral health. In collaboration with the University of South Florida Center for Traumatology and the U.S. Southern Command, Janet helped train 60 mental health workers in San Salvador after El Salvador suffered 2 major earthquakes in 1 year. She also helped design research interventions for victims of natural disasters throughout Central America. And currently, Janet uses her 30 years of experience to help individuals, couples, and families heal and thrive in her position with Rejoice Counseling and the Latari Group. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you. Great to be here. Good to see you, Liz.
Janet, we have had an amazing turnout for this webinar. We had more than 180 people register, and obviously we won't have that many people show up, but isn't that cool?
That is cool. It sounds like a lot of questions about the topic, and I'm glad to hear that because I have a lot of information.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about what is narcissistic abuse.
Okay. I wanted to start with what is narcissism and then talk about the abuse.
Oh, yeah. That's a better start. Yes.
Well, yeah, I just figured that would make a flow better.
Okay.
So this is the only part of my presentation that's a little clinical, but it is the definition of narcissistic personality disorder according to the DSM-5, which is the manual that we mental health people use to diagnose mental health issues. And so narcissistic personality disorder is can be really on a continuum, but as long as a person has 5 of the following 9 qualities, traits, characteristics that I'm going to name, behaviors, then they can receive that diagnosis. So the first one, well, first they say a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, as indicated by 5 or more of the following 9. So grandiosity, need for admiration, lack of empathy. Number 1 has a grandiose sense of self-importance, exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without the achievement. A lot of times you'll ask them what their career goal is, and they will say, oh, I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer. But meanwhile, they're a high school dropout. So, it doesn't jive, that they don't see the steps needed to accomplish to get to that goal. Number 2 is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. They might write a letter that this is what men have dreamed of throughout the ages. This is the love that men have always sought, and I have it for you. Number 3, believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by, or should be associated.
Oh, we have somebody who needs to mute.
Yeah, I know.
Sir, could you mute? And thank you. If we could shut off our video too, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so believes.
So yeah, believes he or she is special, unique, can only be understood by or be associated with other special or high status people, or maybe high status institutions. Number 4 requires excessive admiration. Number 5 has a sense of entitlement. Number 6 is interpersonally exploitative, takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own ends. Number 7 lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Number 8 is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of him or her. And number 9 shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. So, like I said, if they show 5 of those, we could diagnose them as narcissistic personality disorder.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I was a
Yeah,
little confused. So it's not that
yeah,
there's 5 things, it's there's this big list of things. And
yes.
if they have 5 of those a lot of the time or almost all the time, then they
Mhm.
can be considered suffering
Yeah,
from narcissism.
that's right. I started to say it in Spanish. Eso.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Perfect. Yes. Eso.
You
Exactly.
understood me, Liz.
Yes. Okay. Great.
So yeah. So anyway, some of those may ring true with some people you know that have kind of prompted you to come to this. Um, so then the question is, what is narcissistic abuse? And Dr. Romani, I think you say her last name, Dursavula, she is, everybody calls her Dr. Romani. She is a psychologist who has written extensively, researched about narcissism and narcissistic abuse. She says in order to help those who are abused, you have to understand the narcissist too. And she has an acronym that kind of sums up the abuse, and it's dimmed, like the lights are dimmed. So the first one, D, is for devaluation. They devaluate other people in comparison to themselves. The I in dimmed stands for invalidation. They don't validate you, your behavior, your feelings. In fact, they do the opposite. They try to invalidate it.
Mhm.
Okay. If they're abusing you, they also minimize. So the first M is minimization. Oh, it's not that bad. Get over it. You know.
Mhm. Mhm.
The second M is the big one, manipulation. And that involves gaslighting. Gaslighting may be a term you've heard, and I want to expand a little on gaslighting because one time a client said to me, "Do you know where that term came from?" And I said, "No." And she told me about an old British movie called Gaslight. And so I watched it, and it was really good. It was very melodramatic. It was an old movie, but it really drove home the idea of gaslighting. And
Wow, I'm gonna have to look that one up. I'm
yes, it
definitely
was
looking that one
really,
up. Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of fun to watch. But it was in the era when out on the street there were gas street lights.
Yeah.
We had those here at one time too. And so that's where they got the title. They would take the camera and show the gaslight. And this guy was trying to convince his wife that she was crazy to get rid of her so he could have the money that her aunt had left. So that was the premise. Now, I had a client who it was like straight from that movie when she told me about what her now ex-husband did. He uh he said to her, "Where's your wedding ring?" And she said, "I don't know. I've been looking for it. I always leave it in the bathroom on the counter and it's not there." And he said, "Yeah, you just don't want to be married to me and you probably threw it away." And so he had a habit of being abusive to her.
Mhm.
And eventually she found it in a plant in the bathroom, which undoubtedly he had put there. It didn't just fall in, it had to be placed.
Wow.
Yeah, it reminded me so much of that movie. So that's an example. There's plenty of examples of manipulation. Then the E in dimmed and entitlement. And we talked a little bit about that, thinking you're going to be a doctor when you don't do the work to get there. And the final D is dismissiveness, to dismiss your concerns, to dismiss your statements. So dimmed, devalues, invalidates, minimalizes, and manipulates or gaslights, entitlement, and dismissiveness. So there's more to be said about the abuse, but that kind of sums it up,
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that somebody would do that or live that way.
hmm Yeah, we often wonder, about that. We who are not narcissistic.
Mhm.
And it's really sad. It's really a sad way to live because what appears to be this giant ego,
Mhm.
this very high self-esteem, I kind of picture it as a balloon,
Mhm.
and then any little puncture and it just
Mm.
the air goes out. And we call that in our work a narcissistic injury.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
When the balloon gets popped, and so
Uh-huh.
then they're just like deflated and
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm. And so they rage and they attack and they try to
Mhm.
get back to where they were. Yeah.
Well, that kind of goes into the next question, Janet, which is what would be signs of abuse? How would these dimmed uh, things be put into practice, I guess, or
How would they show up? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. The raging, um, the questioning, the denial, betrayal. Oftentimes in a marriage, there's affairs.
Mhm.
Um, and then to minimize it, oh, I was just having dinner with her, when in reality there was a lot more going on. You're just insecure, you know.
Mhm.
Um, or, oh, honey, I could never do that after they had had 5 affairs, you're just imagining things. So
Mhm.
the gaslighting would come into play there. Um, Yeah, and then the person starts questioning themselves. You have to be a really strong person and know what you're dealing with to counter that. But they tromp all over your boundaries. Yeah.
Mhm.
hmm So,
I guess I have one concern, Janet, because I know that narcissism or calling somebody a narcissist is kind of an in thing right now.
yeah,
So are there levels of narcissism, or is there like a difference between just being very selfish or self-centered and being narcissistic?
that is a great question. Yes, it's on a continuum.
Mhm.
And yeah, we all are selfish at times, one time or another, for various reasons. But when it's a consistent pattern, that's when it becomes a problem. Now, I think Dr. Ramani defines like 9, if I recall, subtypes of narcissism. And on one side of the continuum, they're very benign. Okay. Self centered, yes, but they don't cause havoc. And then as you move along the continuum, in the middle, where most of them are, is they are grandiose, and they may cause difficulty to live with them. Then at the other end of the continuum is what she calls malignant, and those can enter into psychopathy, being a sociopath, a psychopath. And Liz, I was thinking about that guy that we both watched. He's in prison now. Do you remember his name? I was trying to remember it. There were TV shows about it. Dr. Ramani had interviews with some of the people. This guy had moved in with his daughter who was in college and like in a big house with other college students. And he was very charming and they all liked him at the beginning. And oh my, the turn it took over time and the abuse that he foisted on them, so bad that he's in prison now.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Um,
don't remember the name, but I do remember listening to that series. It was
yeah,
very terrible.
extreme. That's an extreme narcissist. Most
Yeah.
people in prison have narcissism and or antisocial personality disorder, also known as sociopath. But, they're both there. And of course, you can have both as well, both personality disorders. That's something I learned when I got out of graduate school. I worked in a clinic where I knew I would get everybody and that I would learn a lot. It was not the highest paying job I was offered, but I knew I was going to really learn. And one of my clients, well, the guy before me, he had written a letter saying, I'm leaving and Janet's taking my place. And if you want an appointment, call for an appointment. So one day I got a call that he had wanted me to let his um, probation officer know that he was in therapy. And I said, well, first I'd have to meet you. And so he did make an appointment and he came in. And in the office where I was, there was a two-way mirror. And as he walked in my office and he looked in it, he literally did this. Look at
Hmm.
firing his muscles as he walked past and then took a seat, and he went on and on and on. And finally I said, okay, are you done with the BS now? And he said, you and I are going to get along just fine. And then, of course, he never came back. But but he had that one appointment that he could tell his probation officer about. So, at first I was like, well, should I say narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial? And then I realized, oh, you can have both. You could have several personality disorders, which leads me to also speak about nowadays, narcissism is more common,
Mm.
but it's not as recognized in our field
Mm.
for various reasons. They do not stress it in personality disorders as much in graduate school. So a lot of
Mhm.
new grads, they're not used to that. They don't recognize it when they see it. And part of the reason is because when HMOs came in and took over, if you diagnosed it, you had to treat it.
Mm.
And
Okay.
I mean, narcissists rarely change. I'm sorry to say, but the statistics bear this out that with years of therapy, if they stick with it, like 0.5% change.
Mm.
So
That's really sad to hear. Yeah.
it is. It is. It's
Mhm.
one of the least changeable of the personality disorders. And so if it was hard to say he has this if you're not going to treat it, and insurance didn't want to pay for it for life. So I think that's part of the reason that it's not stressed as much. But
Yeah,
it
that
is,
makes complete sense.
that's
Yeah.
it. Yeah, good.
Let's
So,
move into giving our audience a little bit of some solutions or some
mhm,
ways to live with these people that are in their lives. I'm imagining that everybody who's tuning in knows somebody, right?
yes.
So, what would be some keys to surviving a relationship, or especially for people who maybe can't get out of the relationship? It's your parent, it's your child, it's,
Mhm.
you know.
Yes. First of all, is to take care of yourself, self-care.
Okay.
Um, for example, uh, meet a friend for coffee, meet friends for lunch, do things for yourself that are fulfilling. Be with people who you know are going to affirm you and not bring you down. Um, be involved in your church and the activities there. Not to say that a narcissist won't show up at church,
Mhm.
However, that can be very affirming also because, and I'll get into this with the spirituality, but we are God's beloved, okay? And He does not want us to be mistreated. He doesn't want us to be treated like that. So do things for yourself. Um, Learn to set boundaries. Now, they may or may not be respected, but the fact that you set them is important. And then radical acceptance. That's what Dr. Ramani calls it. Radical acceptance that the narcissist probably isn't going to change. Okay. But we can always pray for miracles, and miracles do happen. Usually it takes some act of God, some life-shattering attempt or event rather, that will help them to change. Okay. Like there was this one guy I know that he worked in a warehouse, and the forklift pinned him against the wall, and he was very, very injured. But he changed very, very much in his life after that. So that's an example of, a life-changing event. Um, Taking care of yourself is real important. There is a book called Boundaries by Townsend and Cloud, and I imagine a lot of therapists refer people to that book. They love it. Townsend and Cloud are two Baptist pastors who wrote this book, and they quote scripture about why boundaries are important. So another book that might be helpful to you is Codependent No More, written from the perspective of, you might have someone in your life who's a substance abuser, and it ends up making you a little crazy too. And so this book is very educational on how not to let that happen, or how to get out of it making you crazy. Okay. What was your original question again?
Yeah, we were asking about practical steps for
Fine.
surviving and thriving.
Right. Yeah, so
Mhm.
those are two biggies. And get a therapist for sure. Get a therapist to talk to, because you don't want to go through this alone. And even if you stay in the relationship, the therapist can give you hints on how to survive. A therapist will never tell you what to do as far as to stay or to leave. That's your decision, but they can help you either way. Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. So those are some of the things you could do.
Are there any tricks for communicating? So say
Mhm.
this is somebody who you need to keep in your life still for whatever reason. Are there
Mhm.
any like methods for communicating effectively or protecting yourself or
Okay. Also, a good question. I would advise using iMessages rather than you. Okay.
Mm.
And that's true of,
I thought you were meaning iPhone messages. I'm like, what?
oh,
No, no, no. I
yeah.
just did. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah,
Said
that's our
I.
era,
Like
huh?
I feel, I need,
Right. So,
I'm frustrated
exactly.
right now.
Right.
Okay.
I don't want you to speak to me like that again.
Oh,
And
okay.
they may mock you. They may, react in a way that is not healthy and that does not feel good. But the fact that you set that boundary and know that if he were healthy or she were healthy, they would uh, do better with that. And then to walk away, to know when to detach. I don't mean walk away, leave necessarily. You
Mhm.
might leave the house for a while and work on your own anxiety and your own hurt. Um, but to detach, which is a term that comes out of 12-step groups, especially like Al Anon. If you're living with an alcoholic, or you grew up with an alcoholic, anybody who has an alcoholic in their life can go to Al Anon. So it's just about anybody. And they teach
Yeah.
you to, to detach, which means you still might love the person, you still might be around them, but you don't allow them to enter into your space as easily. Okay.
Mm.
So people say, detach with love. What is that? How can you do that? But you can learn to. You can learn to realize, consider the source. This person is sick. What they're saying is not true. There's a lot of things that you can detach and tell yourself to help with that.
Okay, so it sounds a little bit like maybe the person who has okay, the narcissistic person is trying to get a reaction from me or something. So
Yeah,
like if I can maybe figure out how I can not get like hooked into the drama, is that what it means? Okay.
that's a good way to put it. Yeah. To stay out of the drama, because boy, they can create it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what happens, so what would happen if I do stay out of the drama? If I'm like, "Oh, okay, like sure, whatever." I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
try not to get hooked in.
Yeah.
What would they do? Would
Well, first of all, you don't have to say anything. You might say, I don't want you to speak to me like that, and walk away. One mistake I think people make is talking too long and too much. It's like talking with a teenager because they are immature in their development. And with a teenager, you gotta cut to the chase, okay? Because you're not gonna win. Okay, you don't play by the same rules with a teenager nor with a narcissistic person. So you make your statement and you leave, or you make your statement and you go take a bubble bath, or you make your statement and you go have coffee with your friend. But don't stick around for the chaos. In other words, don't be drawn into the chaos.
Okay.
Mhm. That's what
So
attachment is. They announce
yeah,
it.
so like I really would need, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I spoke over you.
No, you go ahead.
I would really need to create or brainstorm ways to take that break, to get out, to get away, or
Right. And
if
again,
I,
a
yeah.
counselor can help you with that. Healthy friends can help you with that. Spiritual director can help you. Yeah. And I always say, remembering that you are God's beloved. And, there was a priest in the last century, a Dutch priest, Henri Nouwen.
No, I love him. He's
I
amazing.
do too. I get something from the Nouwen Society in my email box every morning. And he very kind, very loving, and he wrote, "You are the beloved," among many other things he wrote. And to keep that in mind, God loves me. I'm perfect in his eyes.
Mm.
He wants to uh, be my father. He wants to be my spouse. He wants to be everything to me. And to call on the Holy Spirit to give you the peace that you need to deal with this. Now, you may choose not to because it may be healthier for you and your family, and that's not going to be easy though. um,
Mhm.
People think, oh, I'm going to get out of it. And I know one of the questions somebody wrote was, how do you leave gracefully? You
Mhm.
don't. In other words, you might be graceful about it, but trust me, the narcissist will not be. So,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, yeah, there's going to be some chaos there afterwards, too. I would say it takes about 2 years until you really feel free. And we are talking here a lot about freedom, personal freedom. I told you, Liz, that my favorite Bible verse is John 8:32. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you
Set
free.
you free.
And I noticed, Liz, in one of your blurbs that you do on Facebook, I loved what you said about freedom.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's what it's about, is freedom. Freedom from abuse, freedom. And you still might be living there, but you can, in a sense, insulate yourself, and you may decide to leave. You know, I had a client who her mother was very narcissistic. And she was married to a very narcissistic but highly respected Catholic man.
Mm.
And she wanted to leave and she just couldn't do it. And he assured her he would go to therapy and things would improve. Instead, they got worse. He abused their children.
Oh no.
So she definitely, at that point, divorced him.
Mhm.
But she was not prepared. She has several children. She was not prepared to live on her own,
Mhm.
which is something I advise, is preparing legally, financially, and all of that. Be prepared if you do decide to end the relationship. But anyway, so she had to live at her parents, and her mother, who had had affairs when the person was growing up
Mhm.
and was just a terrible mother, mean as a snake to her and the children while they were living there.
Mhm.
And after 2 years, she finally got her own place. She really worked hard to do that. And
Mhm.
it's like a new lease on life for
Thanks be
her
to God.
and for her children. Praise God is
Mhm.
right. Yeah. But that's what happens a lot of times. People say, how did I end up with this narcissist?
Mhm.
Well, if you had a parent who had issues that were very difficult, you subconsciously might choose. And when I say subconsciously, people get, huh? You know, in other words, you didn't plan this at all. You didn't even know it was happening.
You're not aware, right? You're
You're
not
not
aware that you're
aware.
doing it. Yeah.
But you might choose that same kind of problem in your spouse because your subconscious says, you can fix this now. You're an adult. You were a child then, you couldn't do anything about it, but now you're an adult. It's very common, actually, for that to happen. And of course, we can't fix anybody. The only
Mhm.
person we ever have hope of fixing is ourselves. Yeah.
Before we move into questions, I want to move to the spiritual side of things, Janet, just because I know you had some nuggets to share with us.
Mhm.
What would you like to share regarding this topic, narcissistic abuse, and any spiritual insights you have?
Yeah. Well, as I said, Henri Nouwen, you are the beloved. And there's also, I know you know them, we talked about it one time, bars.
Oh yeah,
Conrad Bars was,
Conrad Bars. Yeah, affirmation therapy and
yes, you
yeah.
can look him up, and his daughter actually practices in Dallas.
Mhm.
And
Suzanne Bars. Yeah,
Suzanne Bars, thank you.
yeah.
And they've both written a lot about this, and she's been on EWTN, the Catholic station. Um, and, you know, connecting with that kind of affirmation would be very helpful. They're both very Catholic. As I said, Henri Nouwen, you are the beloved. Reading things like that give you the spiritual perspective on how God sees you. Um, I have a priest friend who I studied with to become Catholic, and he was in Tampa at that time, and he was a parish priest, but forming his own order, got permission to do that, and now it's in Peru. Father Philip Scott. He's kind of well known. He comes to the States to give missions and things. But one day I was having a lot of stuff happening at my job that was at a Catholic institution. And I called him and just, poured it out and said, what is going on? And he said, Janet, the church is a great place for evil to hide. And when you think about it, yeah. Well, when you think about what has happened in
Mhm.
um,
abuse.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
what
in the
what
church,
is sexual abuse and that scandal that's happening? It's an entitlement and an illness. Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
And why is it easy to hide? Because most of us in the church are loving people and want the best for others. And it's kind of easy to be naive, but maybe we can't afford to be that naive. Maybe we need to have our eyes open. And I think we've learned that, in the church. I mean, just crazy stuff was going on at that job that I mentioned. And
Yeah.
yeah, and when he said that, I thought, I get it. I get that. So, I brought that up because we're talking about spirituality and the goodness, but of course, we all know that the contrary of that is evil, that really
Well,
wants to do us in, right?
oh yeah. Well, I mean, the enemy wants to attack, and this is where he attacks.
Exactly.
What
Saint
is the
Michael the
church?
Archangel. We got to pray that prayer, Saint Michael the Archangel.
That's a good one, Janet. What on the topic of like abusive marriages? What does the church say about an abusive marriage? Is the person because it's, they're not maybe they're not beating you physically,
Right.
right? So like what is the person's responsibility before God in this situation?
Good point. And if they are beating you physically, please leave because we all read in the newspapers what happens. And it could mean your death, death of your children. So we encourage you to take care of yourself and your kids that way. But this is more insidious, this emotional abuse. And first of all, God does not expect you to live like that. Remember, you're his beloved, and he does not want that for you. And there are annulments for this is how it works, basically, to distill it down. Canon lawyers, I mean, I'm no theologian or expert on this, but I do know that canon lawyers look at the marriage. And if one or both parties was not capable of a sacramental marriage when they got married in the church, then they say they can annul it because you have to be at a maturity level to
Mhm.
be able to commit to loving one another in such a way that's not detrimental. So, you'd have to talk to your priest and all about that, but there I don't believe that God expects you to live like that. And usually the other party, other than the narcissist, is super committed, wants to make it work no matter
Mhm.
what. And, sometimes you're up against something that you can't change. And
Mhm.
that's, like I said, where Dr. Ramani says radical acceptance that it's not going to change. So you make your decision with that in mind.
Yeah, it sounds like a very hard situation to be in, but perhaps with a trained therapist, such as yourself, right, or some other people out there, the the person could make that decision, right? So, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's okay if
Mhm.
they don't, if they decide, like I said, the therapist will
Mhm.
not decide for you, but will support you in your path.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make. It's not that just because you realize that someone's suffering from this disorder and it's detrimental to you or your family that you have to leave. Like you can also see that perhaps that's not what you want to do, and that's okay too. So the first question that came up several times was, what might be the things that cause a person to develop a narcissistic personality like this?
Mhm. Good question. And knowing that it is more common now, even than it
Mhm.
used to be. Um, I think one reason is people are away from God and so make gods out of themselves. Um, but something that's kind of interesting is that our affluent society often creates narcissists, families do, by um, thinking their child can do no wrong, and they're so worried about damaging their psyche and, you know, them having to deal with difficult situations that they rescue them from. But in reality, they need to learn about life. And if we constantly give everybody trophies and saying, you're the greatest, you're the most valuable player, and you're this and that, you know.
Not to call out the YMCA or anything.
Yeah, but that can add to that. But different cultures too are different on this. And those of you who speak Spanish know the niño lindo phenomenon, where if a boy is born, niño lindo means pretty boy, and that in many Hispanic cultures is valued more than when a girl is born, and favored in certain ways. So that can create some narcissism. Um, and other cultures, there are some that do that too. Um, or it could be a culture that elevates the girl above the males, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, you're kind of answering the second question that came in, which was how do we protect or prevent that our children become narcissists? Like perhaps if we know that maybe a parent is narcissistic, like how would we help our children to not develop those characteristics?
Right. I would say to teach kindness, to reward kindness
Oh wow, okay.
over performance of sports and that kind of thing. Yeah, to say that was a very kind thing you did. I'm glad to see that. To create opportunities for them to have friends groups and activities where everybody is equal, where they're not um, elevated for any certain reason to be above the others. Okay. And when you do, if you do hear comments that are tinged with narcissism, that is not what God has for you and for us. We love other people. We don't criticize everything they do. Now,
Mhm.
you also don't want them to turn into real codependence and just accept everything. So you teach them assertive behavior and assertive talk when needed. I think those are important. Yeah. Did that answer maybe?
Yeah, no, that was great because
Yeah.
there's this balance, right, between well, first of all, if you're fostering kindness above competition and like, oh, you won that game, or you're such a good soccer player, or you're such a good artist, or if it's, oh, that was a very kind thing that you did,
Mm.
you really took into account that other person's need, right? But then you also validate or make sure that the child, when they say or help them to say, like, I'm not hungry right now, I would rather eat later, or respect, like if they
Oh, I
say
like that. Yeah.
like, no, I don't want to go play with this kid, you're like, okay, that's fine, right? Like,
Yes, good point.
or I don't want to give that toy away, that's really important to me,
Yeah.
versus having to make somebody else happy. You're not trying to make them always want to make somebody else happy,
Same
but you
thing
are
with Aunt
wanting them to be
Mary wants
kind.
a hug and kiss, and the kid doesn't feel like that's
Yeah,
okay.
okay, you don't have to kiss Aunt Susie or whatever. Like, yeah,
Right.
okay,
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
awesome. Well, you know what, Janet? We are at the end of our hour.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it just goes by so fast. We will
Yeah.
probably have to take a list of the questions that we didn't get answered and come up with a second webinar. How does
Okay,
that
that'd be
how does
great.
that sound?
Sounds good.
Sounds amazing.
I'm
Awesome.
really happy with the turnout and hope that you found this helpful. And yeah. I also wanted to mention a couple of books by Dr. Ramani. You know,
Okay.
we call this bibliotherapy uh, when we counselors give books that can be helpful. But I believe in anything and everything that can help. But just the titles of her books are kind of funny. One is should I stay or should I go? Surviving a relationship with a narcissist. That would definitely be relevant for a lot of you. Another one is don't you know who I am? How to stay sane in an era of narcissism, entitlement, and incivility. And her latest one, it's not you. Identifying and healing from narcissistic people.
Those sound like amazing books. I hope
Mhm.
she has them on audio because that's the only way I get through this thing.
Me too. Me too. I'm sure they are because she's so popular.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you have time, please leave us a review. And if you'd like more information or would like to get in touch with Janet, we've put her information in the chat. Thank you for joining us, and till next time.